Hello, 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 and welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. I am the creator of Change Light, the Change Light system, the Change Light online community, and all kinds of other exciting things that are on the way. I'm so happy to have you here. I get really excited when I get to have this show because I just love talking to all of you and sharing what I've learned and hoping that it really does inspire you and help you to grow in your own journey, and really understand the truth and the value of inner work and how valuable it is to your own journey, and also, of course, how to go about doing it in really simple ways and sometimes really deep and profound ways. So, well, today's topic is how can you begin to recognize your strengths? I'm bringing this up as a topic because I think a lot of times, let me just put it this way. I've met so many people who have no idea what their actual gifts are, what their actual strengths are. And thank goodness for, tests like Strengths Finder. And, there's another one I actually really like. It's a little bit different. I mean, there's like DISC assessment and Strengths Finder. And I'm sure you could think of a lot of others. And I'm kind of blanking right now. There's even one that, is on howtofascinate.com, where her name is Sally Hogshead, really interesting name. And she has this whole system that's basically the like 49 types of personalities and how we each have our own unique way of fascinating other people. And so that can be considered a strength as well. How is it that we appeal to people, and what aspects of ourselves can we use to really help get our message out or really have the impact that we want to have? And so what I find so interesting, and this is true for me too, is how blind we can be to our own strengths, and how sometimes we can just sort of end up like kind of backing up into discovering what our strengths are, or how often we need outside input to recognize what it is that we're good at, and what it is that we can offer the world. Now, there are a bunch of reasons why we tend not to recognize our own strengths, and I want to discuss that first before I get into some tips and questions and stuff to really help you think about what it is that you are great at, and what it is that's part of your divine design to help you live your truth and make the difference that you're here to make, whatever that may be. First of all, let me just say, I talk about strengths earlier in this show. In previous episodes, and I talk about your M powers. And so your M powers are those powers within you whose job it is to help you live your truth. That's their whole job, is to empower you to live your truth, to fulfill your purpose, to be the presence that you're here to be, to have the impact you're here to have. So as always, go back and watch those episodes that talk about your M powers, because those are the parts of you whose that's their job. And it's basically, when we talk about you being designed to live your truth, that's your M powers. Your M powers are those parts of you who have their own unique gifts and skills and foci and talents and aptitudes that really support you in being the presence you're here to be and having the impact you're here to have. But I want to talk in this show more generally about strengths and about like how we can be so unaware of what it is that we're good at. And there are a bunch of reasons why. So for one thing, and it blows my mind how often this happens, and I've done this too, we don't recognize what our strengths or our gifts or our talents are, because they're just so natural for us. They're just so easy. They're just so innate. Like if you're really good at, meeting new people and making new friends, if you're really good at looking at a spreadsheet and understanding numbers, if you're really good at, I don't know, talking people through certain issues or understanding certain issues. We can all have these different aptitudes and skills and gifts that we don't even know that we have, because they're just so easy for us. Because it's like, yeah, so what? Whatever. This is what I do. And because they're so easy, we don't value them. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where it's like they have these incredible skills and gifts and aptitudes and what have you, and just, maybe it's ways they relate to people, etc. And yet they don't even like think anything of it. And I'm kind of going, are you kidding me? You're so good at that. Like, that's such a great ability that you have. And they say, really? I never thought of it that way. Well, of course they didn't, because, well, it's just what they do, right? It's just what I do. This is sort of this is what popped into my head, and it's kind of related. But for example, I was very involved in 9/11, and I was a first responder. And so I spent a lot of times around firefighters for the next couple of years after that. And it was so interesting how people, all around the world were saying, wow, about the firefighters. And there was a lot of hero worship, and absolutely, absolutely, they were worthy of it in terms of having the honor and the respect that they were given, especially since they lost so many of their colleagues, and so many of the firefighters went in there knowing that they weren't going to come out, and they still did it anyway. So I'm not saying that they're absolutely deserving of that awe and admiration, but it was also so interesting to talk to the firefighters, a lot of them, and say how they were so uncomfortable with a lot of that worship, and they were so uncomfortable with all the, oh wow, you're so amazing that you do that, because for a lot of them, they're like, well, that's just what I do. They really don't think much about the fact that they're a firefighter. It's not kind of like, well, I'm a firefighter and sort of swashbuckling and I'm really awesome and amazing. In fact, most of the firefighters I know and who I met back then are very modest and very humble, because it's just what they feel called to do. So they don't see anything special or amazing about the fact that they are firefighters, or that they feel called to do it, because it's just so natural. And I'll even use myself as an example with 9/11, is that when I went down there, I'm not sure if I've shared this on the show before, but when I went down there, I was up at Hell's Kitchen. I was working up in that area, in Times Square area. And when I saw what had happened, I knew that I was going to go. There was no question. Meanwhile, my family was calling me, or trying to call me. The cell towers and stuff were out, but they were calling me and saying, you got to get out of Manhattan. You got to get out of there, because they're talking about they're going to bomb Times Square, and there are going to be all these attacks and everything. And so there was all this anxiety, but I knew that I wasn't going anywhere except to ground zero, period, full stop. And so I went to ground zero, and I ended up spending the next couple of weeks there. And I basically lived there, and I was helping and I was serving as whatever ways I could. The point is, though, is that for years after, whenever people share or hear my story, and I don't really share it that often, like someone might mention 9/11, and I don't feel the need to be like, oh yeah, I was there, because I don't feel any sense of like, wow, I'm so special or great. But the point is that when people would find out that I was there, they would say, wow, that's so amazing you were there. That's so great that oh gosh, that's so courageous, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't think anything of it, because it was just like, well, of course, like, to me, there was no question. There was no doubt. I didn't think I was doing anything special or courageous. I didn't think it was any, strength of mind that I was doing, that. And even some of the things I did down there, people saying, wow, that was really amazing. I didn't think anything of it, because it felt so natural and innate and easy for me to do it. I'm not saying it was always easy. And in fact, I ended up having a lot of health issues afterwards, in the years after. And that was definitely not easy. But my point being is that we can have these strengths, these tendencies, these aptitudes, that where we don't think anything of it, because it's just easy for us. But for other people, they're like, oh my gosh, that's so fantastic. And that's so amazing, because it's not easy or natural for them. So that's one of the biggest reasons I've found why people tend to dismiss or devalue their own unique gifts and skills, because it's just who they are. So they don't think there's anything special about it. And also, we assume that other people have those same gifts and skills, because if it's easy for us, well, that just must be what they can do too. Don't even think about it. But that's the truth, is we're all designed so differently for a reason, because we're each meant to play different roles. We're each meant to bring different gifts, different skills, different aptitudes, different passions, etc., to any given situation, and to play different roles. I'll remember something else too, that my mother told me this story years ago, or she didn't tell me a story. It was back when I was still trying to figure out, what is my purpose? What is my mission? What is my truth? And I've always been this like visionary, ideaphoric, like big future stuff, like creating big things. And I'll never forget when my mom, I forgot what prompted her to say this. She goes, well, there are people who really they just like to serve people like you. They like to be part of something where there's someone else who has the idea, there's someone else who has the mission, but they like to be in service, and they like to be in service to that mission. And it was like my head like spun around. I'm like, whoa, really? Really? Because it had never occurred to me that other people didn't feel, let's say, as driven with a sense of purpose and mission, that other people didn't sort of have these big visions, because it was just so innate for me. And so that's something I just want you to notice, that a lot of times we don't recognize our own strengths because we don't think of them as strengths. We don't think of them as anything special, because to us, they aren't special because they're just simple and easy and straightforward. But to other people, they are invaluable. To other people, they're superpowers. Okay. So just something I just wanted to point out. And also another reason, before I get into ways that you can start to recognize your own strengths, another reason why we tend not to really see aspects of ourselves or gifts we have or talents or tendencies, a lot of times the reason why we don't see them as strengths is because we've been criticized for those things. I touched on this a little bit in a previous episode when I talked about how can your struggles guide you to your strengths. And I talked about how sometimes the very thing that maybe when we're children, when we were expressing a certain emotion or a certain ability, or showing up a certain way, and then maybe someone came along and criticized us for it. Or maybe we were in this moment of joy doing this thing we loved, and somebody else didn't understand, or somebody else was threatened, or what have you. And so they tamped down on it, or they criticized us, or they made us to feel bad for being that way or having that ability, or what have you, because they were jealous or whatever. It could have been another kid on the playground that made us feel bad for showing up a certain way or expressing ourselves in a certain way, or, showing a certain talent or gift. And so what ends up happening is we take in that message, that thing that we think is great and wonderful about us. On some innate level, we know this is a good part of us, and yet we take in a message that there's something wrong or bad about that part of us. And so rather than seeing that as a strength that we have, we see it as a weakness. We see it as a flaw. I know I've used this example before, but this one for me is such a huge one. And that is that I was all throughout my childhood made to feel bad, made to feel like there was something wrong with me for being emotionally sensitive, for being very, emotionally dramatic too, very, very expressive. But also very, very emotionally sensitive. I would cry easily, or I'd react certain ways to certain things that other people would be like, why is she having that reaction? And so I felt shamed, and I felt criticized, and I felt made to, like that there was something wrong with me and that I was flawed. And so I spent a lot of decades, a lot of years hiding that part of me, like cutting off that emotional sensitivity, because I was afraid of being criticized and because I thought it was something that was wrong with me. Well, as it turns out, it is a superpower of mine. Personally, my emotional sensitivity is part of my empathy, my ability to connect with people, to feel whatever it is that they're feeling, and be able to help them feel understood and valued and validated. And also with the work that I do, if you've been following my show, you'll see that it's all about tuning in, tapping in, and honoring that truth inside of you. So that the point is, and you may be thinking of examples for yourself as I'm sharing this example for myself, but the point is, the very thing that I was criticized for as a child has turned out to be my greatest gift. This massive superpower that once I started to actually honor it and value it and embrace it, was like, wow, this is actually pretty darn cool. And sure, some people might still think that I'm being overly dramatic or emotional or what have you, but I know how I can use those gifts to help others and to make a difference. And so again, that's a big reason why we actually may think that what's a weakness that we have, or what's a strength, that we may actually think it's a weakness. And so that's, again, go back and watch that episode, because I talk more in depth about that actually that's where we can find these fabulous hidden strengths that we didn't even know were there, or that we thought were the opposite. So those are the main reasons why we tend not to recognize our own strengths, because they're innate, they're natural, they're just easy for us. We don't think they're anything special. So therefore we don't value them as special or value them as a strength. Also because we assume everyone else can do the same thing, and or is the same way or has the same perspective, etc. And also because we've been criticized for them. And so actually our strengths are really hidden underneath what we think are our weaknesses. So that's where you can start to kind of notice, where are you dismissing aspects of yourself that other people might really value, or that, excuse me, might be very, very easy for you. Maybe what if you were, rather than take them for granted, start to go, well, wait a minute, what if this is actually a pretty cool thing that, I really do bring value to this situation. I really do bring value to the world in this way. It doesn't feel that valuable to me because it seems so easy, but look at other people and even ask them and be like, well, is that something that you feel like you're good at? Because I can tell you right now, there are so many things in this world that I'm like, I know I'm really good at a lot of things, but I am not good at a lot of things. Some examples like, understanding things like health insurance and taxes and accounting and stuff like that. I am always like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to those people, because that is not something that is natural or easy for me. They're way out of my genius zone. And speaking of genius zone, that's where I find it's really, really important that we really honor and as much as we can stay in your genius zone, because that is ultimately the place where we're meant to be, is doing what it is that lights us up. Leads me to the next thought that I have. And this is then, how can you recognize your own strengths? How can you start to see what are in fact your strengths, and stop taking them for granted and stop dismissing them as just like, whatever, and going, well, you know what, maybe there's actually some value to this and I really can help people. So here are some great questions to ask yourself. One, kind of in keeping with what we said before, what is it that feels really easy or natural or innate for you? What is it that you do that you can just kind of do and not even think about? That could be one of your strengths. And mind you, I want to just add a note here that when it comes to any of this stuff, asking other people for their feedback, people we trust, really, really important to do that, because they can often reflect back to us things that we never saw in ourselves, or again, never really valued. But I would say, what is it that feels easy or natural or innate for you? What is it that you can lose yourself, like lose time in the day? What is it that you can absolutely just like 3 hours have gone by and it felt like 30 minutes? What are those activities? What are those even like, trains of thought, even just ways that you process the world, or you're curious about, or you're thinking about? What is it that takes up a lot of time, that doesn't feel like it takes up a lot of time? That's the kind of thing that you can really pay attention to and start to discover that, well, yeah, maybe this is part of my purpose, or this is part of my strengths, because it doesn't feel like a struggle for me. If it felt like a struggle, then it would probably feel like it was taking a lot longer, right? But if it doesn't feel like a struggle, oftentimes it's because we're in the flow. There's that whole book called Flow, where it talks about you being in that zone and you're being in that flow. So that's another thing to ask yourself. What is it that you lose yourself in? Here's another question that I absolutely love, and I ask people this question all the time. What lights you up? What is it that lights you up? What is it that basically makes you feel so light, so expanded, so free, so like, oh, like this, that, the light comes to your eyes. You notice that you're more excited when you talk about it. What is it that lights you up? Because when I talk about your truth, and even the image that I show you about your inner truth, it is your light. It is the absolute most powerful and beautiful light that you can shine, is when you're living your truth, you're trusting your truth, you're actualizing your truth, you're really embodying that. So think about it that way. When you're doing what lights you up, you are doing what is in alignment with your truth. And if it's lighting you up, then it's energizing you, then it's filling you with that light and with that energy, with that radiance. And it's like this natural fuel then. So this inner fuel for whatever it is, that you're here to do, and that keeps you going. So that's another way to recognize some of your strengths. Now, mind you, I will throw this in here. There can be times when, for example, like Someone might say, well, you know what really lights me up is singing. And maybe that person cannot carry a note. So you could say, well, that's not really their strength. That's just what they really enjoy. Well, I would say that's okay. Go ahead and do it, because if it's lighting you up, then you're lighting up the world. If it's lighting you up, it's energizing you. So in that case, it almost doesn't even matter whether or not you can carry a tune. If you're really enjoying yourself, then do that thing because it feels so good. Not only that, what if your strength, you could like look at that differently and go, well, okay, so the strength may not be about, well, I'm a great singer, but more, I am self-expressive. I love to express myself, or that I love to show my emotion through sound. You see, so there are all different ways of starting to kind of parse it out and go, well, what is the strength that's in this activity that brings me so much joy, that lights me up? So what lights you up is the third question. Here's another question. What did you love doing as a child? So when we're children, a lot of times, I mean, obviously we can grow up in really difficult circumstances that can kind of distort our perception of ourselves and can distort what we naturally would be doing as a child. For example, if you had to take care of a parent who was ailing or had an addiction problem or what have you. And so that might have really kind of veered you in a different direction, and you never really felt like you had a really like sort of pure childhood experience, if you will. So understanding that sometimes that can happen. But even so, I love to think about, and you might think about too, when you're thinking about what are your strengths, what is it that you would loved to do as a child? What did you love to do as a child? What is it that brought you joy? What is it that you would naturally gravitate towards? So for example, my stepdaughter, she loves to draw, and she draws all the time. But even prior to that, and she draws, I should say, she draws these characters that, and she makes up these stories. Even prior to that, you know, when she was little, she had her Legos, and she would create these worlds, like these whole worlds and all these different characters, and create all these stories. Well, luckily she's been able to actually have a through line there where, you know, now she draws and she writes stories and she keeps using those gifts. But for you, maybe you haven't had such a strong through line. So when you were a child, what is it that you love to do? And you might say, well, I love to be a ballerina and I wanted to dance, but I don't really dance now. Okay, but it could still be something that would, by doing that activity, will light you up and guide you in the direction of what it is that is your strength, what strength is being expressed through that activity. Another thing can be that as a child, you were really good at, you know, relating to other kids on the playground, or you were really good at math, or you were really good at, you know, you like to do like the volunteer projects at school or what have you, or you really like to teach the other kids. Elizabeth Warren, the senator, she talks about how when she was a kid in second grade, she had this teacher who let her teach the other kids reading, and she loved it so much. She just loved teaching. And so what has she gone on to become? Well, she became a professor at Harvard, and law professor. And then she ended up, you know, she's a senator. Of course, she ran for president. But the point being that if you watch her, you'll see that one of her strengths is teaching. It's teaching concepts that are very complicated, and not just law, but just generally very complicated concepts that she's able to distill down into more simple vocabulary and words, so that the average person, and I would say like me, who doesn't understand a lot of that stuff, it's like, oh, okay, that actually makes sense. I can grasp that. So that's a teaching strength that she has, that she's used in a lot of different ways. So that's something that you can even think too, like, what is it that you love to do when you were a kid? You may look back at your old journals or your old drawings, or talk to your parents or anyone else who can tell you what you were like as a kid. And that can start to, you know, spark some of those realizations of like, I guess these are my strengths. I guess this is something I really love to do. So another final question that may sound kind of weird, but is going back to when I talked about 9/11 and how at 9/11, you know, I ran down there to help. What ended up happening was, so it was a lot of regular people, regular New Yorkers. Like, we were not firefighters, not cops, just regular spontaneous volunteers is what we call ourselves. Just spontaneous volunteers gone down to help. It's so fascinating. If you've never been in a disaster zone, and when I say disaster, I don't mean it doesn't have to be like, the Trade Center towers falling. It could be you've been in a war zone, you've been in where there have been tornadoes or hurricanes, and there's a lot of devastation and destruction. Any situation where it really has just stripped everything down to like basic human needs, and to where sort of your daily activities are gone, and it's like, in the moment, what is it that needs to be done? It is absolutely fascinating. If you've never been in a situation like that, what I find so fascinating is how people self-categorize, how people just sort of, after a while, I mean, initially everybody's having to, let's say, maybe if you have to, like at 9/11, people had to dig for bodies, or maybe we have to feed people. But as things start to get set up, and people start to self-identify and self-categorize according to whatever is their innate gift or skill, whatever it is that they feel most empowered to do, or just that feels most natural for them. And so what happened at 9/11 was, like, when I went down there, I was, brought down there. It's actually smuggled in a cop van. It was some cops who smuggled us in, because they were like, we need people, we don't have enough people. And so they smuggled us in at like 4 o'clock in the morning, went down there. And so I was there to like run supplies. That was the initial expectation, was like, okay, we need people to run supplies, because we're getting all this stuff in from all these places all over the world, and it's a mess, and we need people to organize and set it up so that we can serve people who are the firefighters and others who were on the pit digging for bodies. The point is that I went down there, I wish originally, to do that. But what I started to do, and I did not notice this until many years later, when other people pointed it out to me. They said, Emily, you had this ability to just see who was in pain, or who was in shock, or who was just needing like human connection. And you had this ability to just identify them, and then just take them and sit them down, and basically bring them back to life, and bring them back into connection. And so I mean, one guy called me an angel of the pit, and I didn't think of myself as that way. I was just doing what I just instinctively knew how to do. I didn't even think anything of it. I didn't think I was doing anything special or interesting. But other people were the ones who were like, are you kidding me? I could never have done that. They were like, I was much happier just like getting boots to the guys on the pit. Don't make me talk about emotions with anyone. I would not have known what to do in that situation. And in that situation, I will tell you, I wasn't a trained therapist. I wasn't trained in any of that. It was just a natural thing that felt right for me to do, just as one human being to another. Whereas you had other people who were like making lists of email and cell phone numbers, and he was like the communications guy, and he just naturally gravitated to that. Be like, okay, what's your cell phone? Okay, what's your name, and where are you? So he was all about logistics and communications and organizing things. And then you had other people who were all about food, and they loved food service. And so they were doing the food service. And then you had other people coming down as healers, and they were doing, and these are more like chiropractors who would come and do their thing. But my point is that people just naturally gravitate in those situations. This is a long way of saying, I want you to hypothetically put yourself in that situation, if you've never been there before. And just what would you feel that you would naturally gravitate towards? What's a need that you just naturally feel that you could be empowered to fulfill? And just see what happens, see what comes up. And that might be another sign of like, well, that's a strength of yours that you don't even think of as necessarily anything special or strong. And yet it is, because it's something that you uniquely can do that not everybody else can do. Others can probably do it, but not everybody can do it. And so that could be a strength of yours. So I hope this has been helpful. I just want to really encourage you to start to pay attention to what it is that what are your strengths that you may not even realize are there, or you may be dismissing as weaknesses or as flaws, and really they're not. Really, they're just fabulous parts of you. They're parts of your divine design that you are meant to bring to your work as a change maker, to your mission, to whatever impact that you're here to have. Thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful. As always, my name is Emily Eldridge with Change Light. Please do join our community, community.changelight.world, where I teach my techniques and I teach all about your inner struggles, your inner strengths, and how to draw them out so that you can feel more empowered to know and live and actualize your truth so that you can shine your brightest light and make the biggest possible difference for the whole world. So thank you so much. Hope you join us there, and I will see you again next week. Bye.